If I try to pinpoint the exact moment something shifted inside me, I keep circling back to that evening when my husband invited our old friends over for dinner. A routine that seemed as comfortable as my favorite cardigan, worn at the elbows but familiar. The house was immaculate, the table set with our wedding china, candles flickering along a line of silent expectations. My husband was orchestrating everything with precision, pouring wine, laughing too loudly at stories I'd heard a dozen times, checking his phone for messages that couldn't wait until morning. I moved through the motions beside him, a reliable understudy in a play I once loved. It should have been just another evening of predictable comfort, but something subtle was off. When my friend stepped inside, her son followed, older than I remembered, taller, his hair a little longer, a small scar at his eyebrow that hadn't been there before. He had a careless confidence like someone used to entering rooms and being noticed. I felt it instantly, the way his eyes lingered a half-second longer than politeness demanded. When he greeted me, his hand enveloped mine, firm and warm, and I caught myself smoothing my skirt after, as if I needed to erase the mark of that touch. The living room, usually echoing with harmless chatter, felt suddenly electric. The men discussed business, voices swelling and ebbing, my friend telling stories from her last holiday. Her son sat across from me on the armchair, legs stretched out, one ankle balanced on a knee. I pretended to be interested in the conversation, but found myself watching him in the periphery, how he swirled his wine, the way his smile twisted at his mother's harmless jokes, the almost imperceptible glance in my direction when nobody else was watching. I excused myself to the kitchen, heart unexpectedly restless. My reflection in the window looked unchanged. A woman in her 40s, neat dress, discreet jewelry, hair pinned up the way my husband preferred. But for the first time in ages, I wondered if I looked desirable. I opened my dresser later that night and hesitated before reaching for the usual nightgown. Instead, I traced the lace of a bra I hadn't worn in months. The silk felt cool against my skin, a secret only I would know. After dinner, my husband retreated, to his laptop, my friend to a phone call, and I offered coffee in the kitchen. He followed, wordless. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, and watched me pour the drinks. "You still make the best coffee," he said quietly, his voice low enough that only I could hear. I felt a blush creep into my cheeks and forced a smile. "Some things don't change," I replied, surprised at my own voice. Was it softer? Breathier? Or was I just hearing myself for the first time in years? He smiled back, slow and knowing, as if he heard every thought tumbling through my head. That night, when the guests had left, my husband came to bed late. He kissed my shoulder, distracted, and fell asleep almost instantly. I lay beside him, wide awake, my mind replaying moments. A touch, a glance, a word spoken just for me. There was a strange heat at the base of my neck, a restless hum beneath my skin, as if my body remembered something my life had forgotten. I tried to dismiss it as fantasy, a fleeting whim brought on by too much wine and too little sleep. But when I closed my eyes, it was not my husband's arms I felt around me, but the memory of a touch that had lasted barely a second. By morning, the feeling had not faded. If anything, it pulsed stronger, a hunger I hadn't let myself acknowledge in years. When I dressed for the day, I reached for that same lace bra, choosing a dress that clung in a way I hadn't allowed myself in a long time. I told myself it was for my own confidence, for a change of pace, for the woman in the mirror who was not quite ready to fade into the background. But as I moved through the house, as the sunlight hit my skin, I knew the truth. I wanted to be seen. I wanted to feel alive again, and I already knew who had woken that part of me. The house was quiet, my husband had already left for work, and my friend's son was staying in our guest room for a few days. I heard him whistling softly in the hallway, and the sound set my nerves dancing. I carried the breakfast tray to the table, hands steady, heart anything but. Our story was only beginning, and even then, Part of me wondered how far I would be willing to go just to feel that spark again. The next morning unfolded with the heavy, deliberate quiet of a house that holds too many secrets. I woke earlier than usual, sunlight tracing pale lines across my side of the bed, the other half already cold. My husband had left before dawn, his absence marked by a folded note on the kitchen table, reminding me of errands, appointments, obligations, a life accounted for in tidy bullet points. As I moved through my routines, something in me felt fractured, and that fracture hummed every time I thought of our guest still asleep down the hall. The air seemed thicker as I dressed, awareness prickling across my skin. I lingered at my wardrobe, hesitating over the safe choices, the faded comfort of my usual cotton. My hand hovered instead over a slip of pale pink silk, almost translucent, with delicate stitching along the hem. It was not meant for mornings, not meant for anyone's eyes but my own. But I put it on beneath my dress, feeling a shiver of anticipation as the cool fabric hugged my body. The choice was deliberate, a private rebellion against the sameness that had crept into my life like fog. I found myself listening for footsteps in the hallway, the muffled sound of someone rising, a shower running, the clink of a glass. Each noise sent ripples through me, and when I finally heard him, my friend's son, emerging, hair still damp from the shower, t-shirt creased from sleep, I felt an ache that was as physical as it was emotional. He offered a casual, "Good morning," his voice unhurried, not quite boyish anymore. I poured us both coffee, trying not to let my hands tremble. Breakfast passed in a strange ballet of avoidance and intent. He scrolled on his phone, but every so often his gaze would flick up, sharp and lingering. I asked if he wanted more toast, my voice catching when our hands brushed over the plate. For a moment, neither of us moved. His fingers were warm, calloused, and the touch was electric. A circuit closed, a message passed in silence. I looked away first, pretending to fuss with a napkin, feeling my cheeks flush. After breakfast, the house quickly divided itself along invisible lines. My friend had gone out to meet someone, my husband lost to his meetings and emails. I moved to the sunlit veranda with a book I knew I wouldn't read. He appeared not long after, carrying a glass of juice and a question. "Is it always this quiet around here?" There was an undercurrent to his words, an invitation, a tease, or maybe a challenge. I laughed, too loudly, and told him, "It's peaceful mostly, sometimes a bit lonely." My own honesty startled me. He leaned against the rail, the sun lighting his profile, and for a moment the silence between us felt loaded with all the things I couldn't say. He watched me over the rim of his glass, and I felt exposed, like he could see beneath the polite surface, straight to the woman I'd tried to bury under years of domesticity and careful choices. Our conversation wandered through safe topics, but I found myself taking risks, making jokes that edged toward the suggestive. He met me beat for beat, laughter low and knowing. The distance between us shrank with each exchange, until I felt as though I could reach out and touch him without breaking the spell. It was a small movement, so ordinary it could have happened by accident. A shift in the chair, a brush of my fingers against his forearm as I reached for the sugar, but he didn't move away. His eyes locked on mine, suddenly serious, as if the world had tilted and we were the only ones keeping it from falling. My pulse thudded in my throat. Then, in a moment that seemed both impossibly long and heartbreakingly brief, he leaned in. His lips found mine, not tentative or questioning, but certain, as though he had been waiting for me to meet him halfway. The kiss was not gentle, it was hungry and urgent, the kind of kiss that leaves you changed in its wake. I felt the heat of his mouth, the pressure of his hand at the back of my neck pulling me closer. When he finally pulled away, the world felt sharper, colors brighter, my senses heightened. For a moment we stared at each other, breathless, the silence full of meaning. He grinned, eyes glinting with mischief, and said, "That wasn't very neighborly, was it?" I managed a shaky laugh, my hands still trembling. After he left the veranda, I sat motionless, heart pounding in my chest. There was no guilt, only a reckless, exhilarating sense of possibility. I pressed my fingertips to my lips, still tingling, with the memory of his mouth on mine, and wondered how I had survived so long without feeling this alive. For a few stolen minutes, I allowed myself to drift in that dangerous warmth, savoring the echo of his touch and the knowledge that nothing would ever be the same. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I busied myself with chores, phone calls, errands, but every task was colored by a secret thrill. I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror, my hair slightly tousled, my cheeks flushed, my eyes brighter than I remembered. I looked, for the first time in years, like a woman with secrets. That evening, as I set the table for dinner, my husband returned, carrying the weight of his own world in the slope of his shoulders. He smiled at me, routine and distracted, pressing a quick kiss to my cheek. I watched him cross the room, wondering if he could sense the shift in me, if the air between us felt different, electric. As we ate in companionable silence, my mind replayed the morning, his touch, his mouth, the way I had let myself want something forbidden. And as I lay in bed that night, listening to my husband's steady breathing, I realized I no longer felt numb. The hunger was still there, fierce and impatient, demanding to be fed. I drifted to sleep with the taste of someone else's lips on mine, and for the first time in a very long time, I did not dream of escape. I dreamed of more. I woke to a restlessness that was both familiar and new, a tightness low in my belly that carried through every movement as I rose, dressed, and wandered the quiet house. I drifted from window to window, watching the street slowly fill with neighbors on their way to work, a child pedaling wobbly circles in the driveway, the mailman sorting envelopes into neat bundles. The normalcy was suffocating, as if the world itself were conspiring to press me back into old habits and safe routines. But that day was different. My friend appeared in the kitchen with a phone pressed to her ear, cheeks flushed, apologizing for a sudden work emergency. She spoke quickly, distracted, explaining that she would be gone for the weekend and asking if her son could stay with us a bit longer, just until her return. I agreed, hiding my excitement behind a careful smile, insisting it was no trouble at all. After she left, the house felt subtly altered. Every sound echoed, a door closing, a step on the stairs, reminding me that the only other heartbeat in these rooms belonged to him. I busied myself with chores, folding laundry, slicing apples for breakfast, but my mind was already constructing possibilities, imagining the brush of his arm as we passed in the hallway, the glint of his smile when he caught me looking. Around noon, my husband announced over coffee that he had planned a spontaneous getaway for the three of us, a rare burst of initiative meant to shake the dust from our routines. He wanted to visit the lake, rent a cottage, change the scenery, as he put it, his tone earnest and eager for my approval. I managed a laugh, masking my surprise with gratitude. The idea of escaping the scrutiny of our neighbors, the closeness of our house, suddenly felt like a gift I hadn't dared to ask for. We packed in a flurry, the kitchen table littered with sunscreen, towels, snacks for the road. My husband moved through the preparations with practiced efficiency, while I kept one eye on our guest, who moved with a deliberate slowness, as if savoring the anticipation. When we finally piled into the car, my husband at the wheel, our guest beside me in the back seat, the space between us felt electrified, charged with every unspoken word from the morning before. The drive was long and winding, sunlight slanting through the trees, the radio playing softly in the background. My husband made small talk about work, the state of the roads, the price of gas. I replied when prompted, but my mind wandered to the warmth of a thigh pressed a little too close, the subtle movement of his fingers drumming against his knee, always in my line of sight. I pretended to nap, head turned toward the window, but I was hyper-aware of every breath beside me. When we arrived, the cottage was as unremarkable as any rental. Pine paneling, faded curtains, the faint scent of lake water clinging to every surface. We unpacked in silence, claiming rooms without discussion. The men disappeared outside to unload the car, leaving me to survey the kitchen, the small living room, the deck overlooking the water. As the day wore on, I watched the easy camaraderie between my husband and our guest, fishing rods, a game of cards, laughter echoing from the dock. I joined in when expected, but always felt slightly removed, as if standing just beyond the reach of their joy. Every so often, our guest would catch my gaze across the table, holding it just long enough to make my heart skip. Once, as I refilled drinks, he brushed past me in the narrow kitchen, his hand landing lightly on my lower back, and I nearly dropped the pitcher. In the late afternoon, my husband declared he was going for a swim and disappeared down the path to the water, leaving the two of us alone for the first time all day. The cottage was bathed in golden light, dust motes floating through the still air. I started tidying the kitchen, nerves dancing in my stomach. He leaned against the counter, arms folded, watching me with a lazy amusement that made my pulse quicken. Our conversation began with safe topics: the drive, the cottage, a memory of a childhood summer spent at a different lake. But quickly the edges blurred. He teased me about my mom voice, about the way I overpacked for even a weekend trip. I shot back, mock offended, that at least I never lost my keys or left my towel on the dock. The banter felt easy, but beneath it something darker stirred. There was a pause, long enough for tension to bloom. He looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "You don't seem like yourself here. You seem restless." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I met his gaze, searching for the right response, wanting to confess and deny in the same heartbeat. I said, "Sometimes I forget who that is." My voice was quiet, almost lost to the hum of the refrigerator. He smiled, not unkindly, and I felt the weight of everything we hadn't said settle between us. The moment stretched, growing fragile and precious. Footsteps sounded outside, my husband returning, and the spell broke, replaced by the steady rhythm of domestic life. Dinner that night was filled with laughter and stories, but I was elsewhere, suspended between longing and dread. I wondered if he felt it too, the way the walls seemed to close in, how the sound of someone's fork against a plate could suddenly make you ache with want. As I lay in bed that night, listening to the quiet lapping of water against the shore, I realized that the boundaries between us were crumbling faster than I could rebuild them. The next day would bring new chances, new risks, and I couldn't tell if I was more frightened or exhilarated by what I might do when the moment came. I closed my eyes, feeling the hum of possibility thrumming beneath my skin, and wondered just how much longer I could resist the current pulling me under. The lake had always seemed to me a place of innocence, a childhood memory of laughter and sunburn, the hush of water against the shore. But that morning, standing on the weathered porch of the cottage, I felt only the thick, insistent press of tension. The cottage was small, built for easy intimacy, every room echoing with the footsteps of the people inside. The air was cool, laced with the scent of pine and damp earth, but inside my chest a warmth was spreading, slow and relentless. Breakfast was a choreography of sidelong glances and unfinished sentences. My husband was in high spirits, making jokes about fishing, and daring our guest to outswim him later in the day. The younger man grinned, but his eyes kept drifting to me, fleeting, calculated, as if we shared a private language that everyone else had forgotten. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks with every look, my hands clumsy as I buttered toast or refilled mugs. It was a dance, unspoken, but I was learning the steps by instinct. After breakfast, my husband set out to rent a canoe, promising to return by lunchtime. The moment he was gone, the house seemed to exhale. I started tidying the kitchen, hands trembling ever so slightly when I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't turn, but I felt his presence, close, unhurried. He reached past me for a glass, his arm brushing against my side, and the contact was electric. He lingered, searching for something, or perhaps only pretending to. I finally turned, unable to bear the closeness without acknowledgement. He was right there, his face open, curious, an easy confidence radiating from him. He said, low, "You never look comfortable in your own kitchen." The remark startled a laugh out of me, but it was the truth. "That's because it's always full of people," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "And half of them never put anything back where it belongs." He grinned, stepping closer, the distance between us shrinking until there was nowhere left to go but forward or back. "Maybe it's because you never let yourself take up all the space," he said. I realized then how little space I'd claimed for myself, in kitchens and in life. The conversation hovered between playful and pointed, each word sharpened by subtext. He asked about my work, my hobbies, the books I'd read recently, but behind every question was another. Are you satisfied? Do you miss yourself? Are you still waiting for something to happen? I answered as honestly as I dared, surprised at how easy it was to speak the truth in fragments. "Sometimes I wake up and feel like I missed an exit somewhere along the way," I confessed, wiping crumbs from the counter. He nodded, not mocking, but understanding. "You can always turn around, or take the next one," he replied, his tone gentle but insistent. There was a pause, a gravity settling over us. I looked away, unable to withstand the rawness of his gaze. In the silence, the only sound was the clatter of dishes in the sink and the distant echo of my husband's laughter. On the lake, the walls of the cottage seemed to pulse with withheld words. Eventually, he broke the quiet. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. I froze. "Regret what?" I tried to keep my tone neutral, but my heart was racing. He shrugged, looking at his hands. "Not chasing what you want." I set the plate down, the sound sharp in the stillness. "I try not to think about it," I admitted. "But lately, it's been harder to ignore." He stepped closer, so close that I could see the flecks of gold in his eyes, the faint scar near his eyebrow. He reached out, hesitated, then let his hand drop, as if the air itself was enough of a boundary. "You don't have to settle," he said quietly. A sudden flush of anger swept through me, unexpected and sharp. "It's not that simple," I snapped, instantly regretting my tone. He didn't flinch. "Nothing worth wanting ever is," he replied, softer than before. For a moment, we stood locked in the small kitchen, the weight of our conversation suspended in the air between us. There was a current pulling us together, a gravity I could barely resist. But I forced myself to step back, grabbing a dish towel, trying to busy my hands. He watched me for a beat, then turned to leave, his expression unreadable. "I'll be outside if you need me," he said, and then he was gone, the screen door banging lightly behind him. I leaned against the counter, breathing hard, every nerve alive with the need for more, for risk, for release, for something that would cut through the gray fabric of my days. I tried to busy myself with chores, folding towels, sweeping crumbs into the trash, but I kept replaying the conversation, the nearly touch, the way he'd looked at me like I was the answer to a question he'd carried for years. The kitchen felt too small, too bright. The sunlight was merciless, revealing every speck of dust, every imperfection. I wanted to run, to hide, to be seen all at once. Later, when my husband returned, cheeks pink from the sun, he brought with him a sense of order that settled the house like a blanket. Lunch was filled with stories, laughter, the sharing of sandwiches, and inside jokes. But beneath it all, the undercurrent remained, running just below the surface, never breaking free but impossible to ignore. That night, as I lay in the narrow bed of the cottage, listening to the unfamiliar symphony of crickets and distant water, I tried to piece myself back together. But I was changed, remade by a few honest words and the promise of something more. I wondered if I would ever again be content with only the shape of my old life, or if I would always crave the sharp, bright ache of possibility that now lived inside me. And as sleep stole over me, I promised myself that tomorrow, whatever it brought, I would not turn away from what I wanted. even if I was terrified of what it might cost. The morning after our conversation in the kitchen, I woke before sunrise, the world still wrapped in the hush that precedes a day's commotion. The sheets around me were tangled, and my mind was even more so. My husband was still asleep, his arm draped over his eyes, mouth open in that gentle, oblivious way I had long ago found endearing. There was a chill in the air, but I felt flushed, my skin too tight for my bones. I lay for a long moment, listening to the soft lapping of the lake outside, the creak of wood settling in the cottage, the silence broken only by the staccato beat of my own pulse. When I finally slid from bed, I took extra care with my appearance, moving quietly through the dim light. I showered, letting the hot water chase goosebumps from my arms. Standing in front of the mirror, I chose a bra I had packed almost without thinking, sheer navy blue with a subtle floral embroidery, the kind of thing I wore when I needed to feel bold, even if no one else would see it. I smoothed lotion on. My legs, brushed my hair until it gleamed, slipped into a sundress that skated the line between respectable and revealing. With every careful choice, I felt a little less like someone's wife, a little more like the woman I remembered being once, hungry for the possibility of being wanted. I found my husband in the kitchen, already busy frying eggs and bacon, humming tunelessly. He looked up and grinned. "Early riser today," he remarked, his eyes flicking over me with a kind of absent fondness. "Couldn't sleep," I replied, pouring myself coffee, careful to keep my gaze away from his. We moved around each other, practiced and efficient, but it felt as if there were a wall between us, one I had built, brick by careful brick. As we ate, the house slowly came alive. The younger man appeared, rubbing his eyes, still flushed from sleep. He nodded a greeting, helping himself to toast, his gaze lingering on me a second too long. My husband, oblivious, launched into a story about a fish he'd almost caught the day before. I played the role expected of me, laughing in the right places, nodding along, but beneath the surface my nerves thrummed. Later that morning, my husband announced he was taking the canoe out again. "You two go explore," he said. "I'll be back by lunch." His departure felt orchestrated, as if the universe itself were holding open a door for something reckless. The moment he was gone, I busied myself with dishes, my hands trembling with anticipation. The younger man appeared in the doorway, silent. He stood there for a beat, watching me as I moved around the kitchen, and the air felt heavy, charged with an energy neither of us dared name. He moved closer, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his eyes, the pulse jumping at his throat. We exchanged a few mundane words about breakfast, the weather, the plan for the day, but it was all a cover, scaffolding around the real conversation. I suggested a walk down to the lake, needing space, needing motion, needing him. He followed me along the dirt path, our shoulders nearly touching. We said little, but everything that mattered was crackling in the air between us. At the shore, the sun was high, the water glittering, insects dancing above the surface. He paused, looking out over the water. "Do you ever think about just disappearing?" he asked quietly. The question caught me off guard. I considered it for a moment, feeling the ache of longing swell in my chest. "All the time," I answered, and it was the truest thing I'd said in months. He turned toward me, searching my face for something. I reached out without thinking, brushing a leaf from his sleeve, letting my hand linger longer than necessary. He caught my wrist, his grip gentle but sure, and stepped closer. Our faces were only inches apart, the world narrowing to the space between our mouths. This time, the kiss was not frantic, not hurried. It was slow, deliberate, acclaiming. The warmth of his lips, the pressure of his hand at the small of my back, the taste of salt and sun on his skin, it all flooded me with a kind of hope and devastation. We broke apart when we heard the distant call of a bird, a reminder of the world waiting for us to return. He smiled, tracing his thumb along my jaw, and I felt myself shiver, not from cold, but from the force of everything I was allowing myself to feel. We walked back slowly, wordless, a fragile peace settling between us. Inside, I found my husband already returned, bustling in the kitchen, preparing a picnic for us all. He looked up, his eyes shining with an enthusiasm I recognized from our early years. "I thought we'd make today special," he said, gesturing to a bottle of wine and a basket packed with fruit and bread. I forced a smile, willing myself to be present, to remember the reasons I had loved him. We spent the afternoon sprawled on a blanket by the water's edge, laughter echoing across the lake, the younger man and my husband trading stories and jokes, the sunlight painting golden halos in their hair. To any observer, we must have looked like a picture of contentment, a family, relaxed and at ease. But beneath it, the undertow of what had passed between us was always there, pulling me further and further from shore. That night, as dusk settled and the world grew quiet again, I lay awake, turning the day over in my mind. I was straddling two lives, one safe and predictable, one wild and alive. I knew I could not remain balanced between them forever. As I drifted toward sleep, I wondered not only what it would feel like to choose, but if it was even possible to return to the person I had been before that kiss by the lake, before the hunger inside me had been named and fed. After that day by the lake, I found myself living with an ache that would not fade. We returned to the city late in the afternoon, the car heavy with a silence no one dared break. My husband drove, humming softly along with the radio, his hand resting on my knee, as if to remind himself of our old connection. I played my part, nodding along to his stories, but every time the younger man shifted in the back seat, I felt a jolt of awareness run through me, as if some invisible thread connected us. At home, the routine picked up where we'd left off. Laundry to be folded, emails to be answered, a half-finished grocery list on the fridge. My husband launched himself into work, disappearing behind the closed door of his office, lost in deadlines and conference calls. I floated through the house, untethered, restless, unable to focus on any one task. The walls felt too close, the air too still, everything imbued with a dull grayness that made the vivid memory of the lake burn brighter in my mind. Each time I passed the guest room, my heart stuttered. Sometimes I would catch a glimpse of him, reading, headphones on, legs stretched out on the bed, and 1,000 words hung between us unsaid. The energy between us felt volatile, dangerous, a current that threatened to break the dam I'd built to keep myself safe. I tried to ground myself in routine, but even the smallest things reminded me of him. A shirt I found draped over a chair, still holding his scent, a stray mug with his fingerprints in the sink. One evening after dinner, my husband suggested a movie night. He dimmed the lights, arranged snacks, pulled me close on the sofa the way he used to when we were younger. For a moment, I let myself fall into old patterns, resting my head on his shoulder, letting him trace circles on my arm. But the intimacy felt distant, ghost-like, as if we were both reciting lines from a play we no longer believed in. He turned toward me, kissing my neck, his hands tentative but hopeful. I wanted to respond, to recapture something lost, but my body felt hollow, my skin numb. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to be present, but all I could think about was another touch, another mouth. My husband noticed my distraction, pausing to search my face. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern in his voice. I forced a smile, brushing my fingers over his cheek. "Just tired," I replied, hoping he would accept the lie. After he fell asleep, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. My thoughts kept circling the same questions, the same points of guilt and longing. Was it fair to want more? Could I blame myself for needing to feel alive? I replayed every stolen moment, every glance, every brush of a hand, every whispered confession, and wondered if this was what it meant to live on the edge of a decision. Days slipped by in a blur. My friend called to say she'd be delayed. Another week. leaving her son in our care. My husband barely noticed the change, buried in work. The younger man and I navigated the house like co-conspirators, careful not to let anything slip in front of others. Yet in private, the smallest things became charged, meeting in the hallway at midnight for a glass of water, lingering in the kitchen while the kettle boiled, sharing brief electric silences that said more than words could. Once, as I passed his open door, he caught my eye and beckoned me inside. The room smelled faintly of cologne and fresh laundry, the window open to the night air. We stood facing each other, the city lights painting patterns on his face. He spoke softly. "Are you afraid?" His words were simple, but they pierced something in me. I hesitated, then nodded, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I'm afraid of what I want." He smiled, sadness flickering in his eyes. "You don't have to be. You're allowed to want something just for yourself." For a heartbeat, I let myself believe him. We stood close, our hands almost touching, the urge to close that final distance so strong it left me breathless. But I stepped back, retreating to the safety of the hallway, heart pounding. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying his words, the way he looked at me, the truth I saw reflected there. I understood, finally, that I was living two lives, one safe, predictable, bound by duty, the other dangerous, exhilarating, full of possibility. The problem was that the gap between them was shrinking, and soon I would have to choose. The next day dawned gray and restless. My friend left before sunrise, hugging me tightly, whispering her thanks. My husband lingered over breakfast, his questions gentle but persistent. Was I happy? Did I need anything? Was there something I wasn't telling him? I parried, careful, promising myself I would find answers soon. That afternoon, the younger man pressed a note into my hand as we passed in the hallway. The words were spare, hurried, the handwriting crooked. "Tonight? Meet me. No more hiding." My heart leapt and stumbled at once, fear and longing tangled together. I knew I couldn't keep dodging the truth, couldn't go on living in fragments. When evening came, I dressed slowly, the simple act of choosing a slip of midnight blue satin beneath my dress feeling momentous, almost ceremonial. My husband retreated, early to his office, tired from the week, leaving the house cloaked in hush. I slipped outside, each step an act of quiet rebellion, feeling as if I was moving through a dream, one where every nerve was raw, every choice sharp and irreversible. He waited for me beneath the old oak at the edge of our yard, his silhouette limned in the soft light from the house. For a long moment, we just looked at each other, the months of tension, longing, and hesitation collapsing into the space between us. When he reached for me, it was not tentative, not shy, but fierce and certain, his mouth finding mine in the dark. The kiss was everything, tender and bruising, desperate and calm, the kind of kiss that burns itself into your memory. For a moment, the world fell away. No husband, no friend, no consequences. Only this heat, this need, this reckless, trembling joy. We clung to each other beneath the shadow of the tree, our bodies pressed close, our breaths mingling. And when we finally parted, his forehead resting against mine, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. We stood in the silence, hearts pounding, the gravity of what we'd done anchoring us to the earth. "There's no going back," he whispered, and I knew he was right. The choice had been made, even if the consequences were yet to come. And as we slipped back inside, silent and unseen, I wondered what new lines I would have to cross just to keep feeling this alive. Sleep barely touched me that night. I lay on my side staring at the wall, the echo of his kiss, and the words, "There's no going back," circling endlessly through my thoughts. I heard my husband moving around in the other room, the murmur of a late phone call, then the slow fading of footsteps as he went to bed alone. The house felt strangely hollow, like the walls themselves held their breath, waiting to see what I would do next. Morning broke cold and colorless. I dressed in silence, fingers trembling as I fastened my bra, my reflection in the mirror a patchwork of anxiety and defiance. I chose a sweater I knew he liked, pairing it with a skirt that brushed just above my knee, a compromise between the safety of routine and the thrill of showing something more. My body ached with a peculiar mixture of regret and anticipation, as if every inch of skin remembered the night before. At breakfast, my husband tried to catch my gaze, but I kept my eyes fixed on my coffee, stirring too long, hands wrapped tightly around the mug. Conversation fluttered around weather, plans for the day, small domestic details. He reached for my hand, giving it a gentle squeeze, and I forced a smile, guilt prickling beneath my ribs. I thought of his kindness, the way he still tried to reach me, and wondered what it meant that I only felt emptier with every gesture. After he left for work, the house grew quiet, the familiar silence pressing in. I found myself drawn to the window overlooking the yard, my gaze searching for a sign, any sign, that last night hadn't been a dream. In the kitchen, I distracted myself with chores, moving objects from one place to another, rearranging jars, wiping already clean counters. When I heard footsteps behind me, my heart leapt in my chest. He entered the room, hair still damp from his shower, wearing a t-shirt that clung to his shoulders. There was a new gravity to his presence, an unspoken understanding that we had crossed a threshold we could never uncross. He leaned against the counter, watching me with a careful intensity, as if memorizing every detail. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but the words tangled and fell away. We stood there in the hush, both of us knowing that the world had shifted. He broke the silence, voice rougher than usual. Last night, I don't regret it. There was a kind of plea in his eyes, a vulnerability that left me raw. I shook my head, voice barely audible. Neither do I. But I'm scared. He nodded, stepping closer, his hand resting just briefly on my wrist, thumb circling my pulse. We can't keep doing this in shadows, he said. Something has to change. The rest of the day was spent on edge. Every room seemed crowded with ghosts, of secrets, of promises, of choices I couldn't yet name. I tried to keep busy, but nothing held my attention. I wandered the house, stopping in doorways, listening. For voices, for footsteps, for the sound of the front door opening and closing. Every time I caught a glimpse of myself in a mirror, I saw a stranger. A woman suspended between two worlds, torn between the comfort of habit and the terror of freedom. When my husband came home that evening, he seemed distracted, frowning over something on his phone. He sat with me at dinner, asking about my day, sharing stories about colleagues I barely knew. I answered dutifully, but my mind wandered. At one point, he reached out, touching my cheek, concern darkening his eyes. You seem far away, he said. Is something wrong? I hesitated, searching for a lie that might sound like truth, but all I could manage was, I'm just tired. He squeezed my hand, trying to reassure, and I felt the wall between us grow thicker. Later, I retreated to the bathroom, locking the door behind me. I stared at my reflection, trying to recognize myself. My skin was flushed, eyes too bright. I ran my hands through my hair, fighting the urge to cry or scream or confess. For a long moment, I pressed my palm against the cool glass, anchoring myself to something solid, something real. That night, as I prepared for bed, I found the note he had left tucked inside my book, a small, hurried scrawl. Meet me tomorrow. No more running! My heart thundered as I slipped it back between the pages. I knew what he wanted, what I wanted too, and yet I felt paralyzed by the enormity of what we had begun. Sleep found me eventually, fitful and restless. I dreamed of water deep and endless, of running barefoot through empty rooms, of hands reaching for me in the dark. I woke before dawn, breathless and unsettled, the memory of his touch burning through the last shreds of sleep. By the time sunlight crept across the floorboards, I had made a decision. I would meet him. I would listen to what he needed to say. And maybe, for the first time in my life, I would stop hiding from him, from my husband, from myself. Whatever followed, whatever broke, would be the price of finally letting myself want what I truly wanted. The morning I decided to meet him, the world felt sharper, edged with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I moved through the house with a strange, weightless calm, every gesture deliberate, an echo of finality in the way I poured coffee, folded towels, left the bedroom door half open. My husband was gone before sunrise, caught up in the rhythm of his obligations, a shadow crossing the hallway, his lips barely grazing my cheek as he left. The lingering scent of his cologne was oddly comforting, almost nostalgic, and yet it pressed against my conscience like a bruise. I dressed slowly, choosing clothes that made me feel more like myself than someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's dutiful shadow. A fitted sweater, my favorite jeans, a silk camisole hidden beneath, small acts of self-assertion. As I brushed my hair, I remembered the way his hands had trembled when he touched me, the way his eyes never left mine in the darkness. I studied my reflection for a long time, searching for a sign, a warning, a reassurance. I found none. Only a woman who, for better or worse, was finally ready to choose. The city outside our window was waking up. Car doors slamming, dogs barking, the world carrying on, oblivious to the fault lines beneath my quiet, ordered life. I left the house through the back door, heart pounding, aware of every sound, every glance. I half expected someone to call after me, to ask where I was going, but no one did. For the first time, I was entirely alone with my own intentions. He was waiting at the cafe on the corner, sitting by the window with his hands wrapped around a mug, the steam fogging the glass in front of him. As I entered, he looked up and something in his face softened. We didn't speak at first. Words felt fragile, easily shattered. I slid into the seat across from him, breathless, aware of the thousand ways this moment could unravel everything. He reached for my hand, covering it with his own, his thumb tracing idle circles over my knuckles. The gesture was both grounding and electric, a silent conversation running beneath the one we would soon attempt out loud. "I didn't know if you'd come," he admitted. His voice was rough, almost hesitant. "I couldn't stay away," I answered more honestly than I'd planned. We talked in low voices, careful and slow, each confession laying another stone on the road between us. He told me how he'd watched me for months, how every glance felt like a promise he didn't dare ask me to keep. I confessed that I had stopped feeling like myself long before him, that the ache he'd stirred in me was both a revelation and a wound. There were silences, long and full of meaning, in which we let the world pass around us, untouched. Eventually, reality pressed in. The scrape of a chair, a barista's voice, the clatter of cups. I realized I was shaking. He squeezed my hand. "What now?" he asked, and the question hung between us like smoke. I looked out at the street, at people rushing by, each of them carrying their own secret burdens, their own unspoken desires. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I can't go back to how things were." Leaving the cafe was like waking from a fever dream. The cold air stung my cheeks, and for a moment I hesitated on the sidewalk, unsure which direction to turn. The thought of home filled me with dread and longing in equal measure. I wanted to protect the life I'd built, the people I loved, but the price of staying silent had become too high. I walked without purpose, letting my feet carry me through the morning, replaying every word, every touch, every possibility. When I finally returned, the house felt impossibly still. My husband was home, his coat slung over a chair, his keys on the table. He called my name, voice gentle, but edged with a worry he could no longer hide. I sat across from him in the kitchen, the two of us divided by a chasm of secrets. He reached for my hand, and I let him take it, the gesture a lifeline and a chain. "I feel like I'm losing you," he said, searching my face for an answer I didn't know how to give. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I forced myself to meet his gaze. "I'm lost," I whispered, "but I need to find myself again." The confession hung in the air, shimmering, irreversible. He squeezed my hand, his thumb trembling. For a long time we sat in silence, the world outside moving on, uncaring. That night, as I lay awake, the lines of my life felt irrevocably redrawn. The house around me was the same, but I was changed, raw and uncertain, yet more honest than I had ever allowed myself to be. I didn't know what the next day would bring, only that I could no longer go on living in fragments. I had chosen truth over comfort, desire over fear, and now, standing at the edge of a future I couldn't predict, I was finally, achingly, alive.